just finished The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. So this book I had read in high school and I hated it. It's probably the book that I remember hating the most. I couldn't remember why I hated it because high school was so long ago, but so I'm like, I gotta read it again. So I got it and I read it again, and this time around I appreciated it a lot more. But part of me understands why I hated it. I think part of why I hated it when I was a kid was that nothing happened in it. To me, there was no setup of events occurring, climax, resolution, sort of like something would go and happen. This was just sort of it's literally telling the events of a few days. And as a dumb high school student, I just didn't get it. Not that I like get it now, but yeah. So this was written in the late '40s, which is an interesting time period. It's almost like it almost feels like the sort of '50s sort of outsiders vibes, but excuse me, but whoa. Um, but anyways, so I'm just gonna go through the plot with my notes. There's not much in terms of plot. So it's about this guy Holden Caulfield, right? He's the main character. He's the one telling us this story. It's like we're sitting down and he's narrating this story, which is sort of the events of his life. And we could get into the whole do we trust the narrator? But anyways, it seems to be pretty straightforward. So he's this like rich kid at a boarding school who gets kicked out for not applying himself. He hates school. The only class he passed was English. He failed everything else. He doesn't apply himself. He doesn't try. But yeah, but he's at this wealthy boarding school because his parents are wealthy. His father's a lawyer. So first, right off the bat, he's the complete opposite of me in every regard. So part of me is like, okay, this is why I hated him as a child, or hated this book. So it starts with the whole school's at this football game late at night, but he's not going to it. Instead, he goes and visits one of his teachers, who's like knows that he's dropping out or getting kicked out rather. So he talks to the teacher, and then he goes back to his dorm, and his roommate's there, and turns out his roommates went out with this girl who was Holden Caulfield's sort of childhood crush. This girl he really likes, and finding out that this roommate, that he knows what his roommate gets up to with his dates, he gets really anxious and really upset about it, and he's just like, he's a very anxious person. But he's not a fighter at all physically, but he'll talk his mouth off. So that's what he did. He starts bad mouthing this his roommate, and his roommate eventually just like beats him up, and he just sort of sits there and takes it. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, I guess that happens in real life, that people just by saying things to people can incite such an anger in them that they violently lash out. But that seems so foreign to me. I don't think anyone could ever say anything to me that would cause me to physically attack them. Like, I don't know. But I guess that's just people, and I don't understand that. So he's like beat up, then he leaves, and he's like, he was gonna stay at school for a bit or whatever, but he decides to just leave it in the middle of the night. And he gets on a train to head to New York because that's where his parents are from. So like a lot of this, I sort of read it. Maybe it's just the way it's written, like a late 1940s New England, New York accent. Anyways, he sits next to this woman. He's kind of like flirting with her in a way, and she's old enough to be his mother. She's the mother of one of his classmates at school, and he's like bigging up this guy, this woman's son, and saying like, oh, he's great. He's won awards. He's like, oh, everyone loves him. But in reality, Holden's like, I hate this guy. He's awful. Although Holden says this about everyone, he does not like very many people. He's got this weird. I don't know. Psychologists could probably put a name on it, or psychiatrists. But he meets someone, and as soon as they open their mouth, he's like, "Oh, this person's an idiot. Oh, I don't want to talk to this person. Oh, they're." It's all about the superficiality of people to him. To him, people are so fake and so phony. I think phony is the word they use a lot, because it's like the 1950 or whatever. Yeah, it's just like he can't. He wants people to be real and honest and true, and he feels like everyone's just sort of the same and fake. Anyway, so after the train, he goes to this hotel and he looks at the window and he sees people in another building across the street or whatever, through their windows, in what they perceive as privacy, doing various things or acting in various ways that people wouldn't act in public. And he's not like, wow, that's so great, they're finally being their true selves. He's just sort of like voyeuristically looking in on them. It's an interesting scene. And I could probably go into it more, but I'm not going to. Um, so then he goes to various bars. Now he's like 16, 17 in this, but maybe it's just the time, but he sneaks into bars and sometimes he gets away with getting drinks, and sometimes they don't give him drinks. He's trying to meet people. He has that loneliness, that desperation for connection, reaching out. But everyone he reaches out to, as soon as he makes a connection with them, even just like briefly, he suddenly flips and is like, "Oh, I don't want to be with this person at all. This can't stand this person. What the heck?" But then he's immediately like, "Oh, I need something else. I need to meet someone. I need to talk to someone." And a lot of what he's thinking about is he wants to call his sister to go talk to his sister. He's got this younger sister that he just adores. He thinks she's brilliant, intelligent, funny. She's just great. He loves his sister. Um, so he goes back to the hotel, and the elevator person, because apparently they had swanky enough to have people in the elevators to push the buttons for you, or whatever they did in elevators in the 40s. The elevator guy tries to sell him on a prostitute, so Holden's like, "Yeah, sure, send her up," and they agree on an amount, a price. So he goes up to his room, and this woman comes in, and he doesn't feel like sleeping with her. He just talks to her for a bit, and he kind of feels awkward, and he's like, "Look, I'll pay you. I don't want to do anything." She's like, I was woken up for this. Don't waste my time. Give me my money." She gets the money, and she's like, "This isn't enough." And he's like, "Well, no, this is what we agreed on. Like, I don't even want anything. Just leave." So she leaves, and then later comes back with the elevator man. Like, "Why are you trying to rip us off? We told you a price, and you wouldn't pay it. Pay up." And they like beat him up, take his money, and leave. And he's like really upset by that, because he's like, "No, you told me it was only $10, not 15. I paid $10. I didn't even sleep with her, blah blah blah." And it's like a really, I mean, a lot of this is depressing, but it's a really depressing, really sad moment. So then he calls up this girl that he used to go with to arrange a movie date, and he doesn't like this girl, but he just needs someone, I guess. And he hates movies. He hates the movies. It must be the acting, the fakeness of it all. He says that actors are always really bad unless they're really good, and when they're really good, they know they're really good and they act like they're really good, and there's no like honest in between quality that he's looking for. Or maybe he's just trying to find something to complain about. Anyways, he hates movies, he hates this girl, and he's going out with her to the movies, because that's the sort of person he is. He's very loose with his money. Like, maybe it's just because he has a lot, but he's just like, he'll spend it on things, or he'll lose things that are expensive, and he'll just give away his money. And he's like, he has a lot of money, but by the end of this, he's like, gets rid of all of it. And that like made me very anxious. Like, he meets two nuns in this diner, and he's like, "Oh, are you guys collecting money?" They're like, "No, no, we're not." And he's like, "Well, here, take a load of money for the next time you're collecting." And they're like, "Well, thank you," and they leave. And then he has this thing where he was like so worried they were gonna ask if he was Catholic. And he's not Catholic, but he's like, every time he talks to someone who's Catholic, they ask if he's Catholic, or there's some way it works into the conversation. "Are you Catholic?" And that upsets him as well. So then he goes and buys this album for his sister that he'd been looking for forever. So he finally finds this album, and he's like, "My sister's gonna love this. Oh, this is gonna be so great." And he goes to the park, because he's like, sometimes she hangs out in the park. Let's see if she's there. And like, it's really cold, and he like trips or something, or somehow the album gets shattered and just destroyed, which is like another like really heartfelt moment of like, he wanted this for his sister, and now it's broken. So he finds some kids there, and he asks the kids if they know his sister. I think in New York, like, you wouldn't be like, "Oh, you're about the age of my sister. You know her?" "Oh yeah, sure, I know her." But apparently they do. Maybe it's just because of the area they're in, and they're like, "She's at the museum," and so he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember going to the museum when I was her age for school," but she's not, because it's a Sunday. But he still goes to the museum anyways. He sort of reminisces about the museum, and that's sort of the one place that he really likes for some reason. Um, but he gets there, and then he decides once he's there, "No, actually, I don't want to go there." It's like he has this sort of longing things that as soon as he has them, he doesn't want them anymore. Um, which is interesting. So then he goes back to his parents' house, and he sneaks in and sneaks into his sister's room and wakes her up and has a chat with her. Now, he doesn't want his parents to find out that he dropped out of school yet, so that's why he's sneaking. But he just has a nice chat with his sister and gives her the broken record, and she like takes it and is like, "Oh great, I'm keeping this forever," and puts the pieces in her drawer. And he's like, he seems happy for a bit. So then he goes out to the phone and he calls up one of his old teachers. That it seems weird. I mean, this is pre-internet social media, but you just have phone numbers and you just call people up all the time or whenever you want. And you're like, "Hey, want to hang out? Sure, let's hang out." Like, so he calls up this teacher that was his at a previous school ages ago. And it's like, "Hey, I need a place to spend the night." Teacher's like, "No problem. Come over. My wife and I will set you up. Don't worry about it. We got a couch." So he goes over, he chats with this teacher, and this teacher's like super intelligent and like giving him advice and stuff. And he's like, "Great." So then he like falls asleep on the couch, and he wakes up to this teacher like stroking his head, and like borderline sexual assault, if not borderline. And so it freaks him out naturally. So he jumps up and he's trying to be like all polite. He's like, "No, I forgot my bags. I gotta go get my bags." Yeah. Ugh. And the teacher's like, "No, no, stay here. What are you talking about? You don't need your bags." But he gets dressed hurriedly and like forgets his tie and rushes out. So then he's like spends the night in the station where his bags are, and he then the next morning goes to the school to give a note to his sister, telling his sister like, "Look, I'm just gonna go out west. I'm gonna start a new life. I can't handle this anymore." So he gives the note to the school, and they're gonna give it to his sister. So then he goes to the place where he's supposed to meet his sister. She's late. She doesn't show up, and then eventually he sees her coming, dragging this big suitcase full of stuff. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm coming with you. If you're leaving, I'm coming with you." And then he gets really mad, and they have a big fight. He's like, "You're not coming with me. Like, this is ridiculous." And eventually he calms down, and he sort of takes her to a not a Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round, and just like spends the day with his sister, and treats her to stuff, which using her money because he had borrowed money from her. And it ends with they're on the merry-go-round, and he's sitting watching his sister, and all these other kids are on the merry-go-round, and all these people are watching their kids, and then it starts downpouring, and all the people flock under the merry-go-round where it's sheltered from the rain, except for him. He just sort of, it's a very visual moment for me. Him sitting on the bench, just drenched with rain, but just the biggest smile on his face, watching his sister go round and round, having like happy because she's having a great time. Then there's the epilogue where, because he's telling the story, he sort of like says, "Well, that's my story, and now I'm." He's like in a psychiatric ward, or he's having counseling, or he's getting some sort of mental help. Before he's going to go back to school in the next year and maybe change his life around and start actually applying himself and trying, or maybe not. Maybe that, I don't know. But it seems like the whole book is just, it's like 2 or 3 days worth of stuff, worth of like, maybe it's just a one long giant mental breakdown that he experienced. Yeah, so that's like the whole plot of the book. So like I said, Holden, he's the total opposite of me. But by about the halfway point of the book, I started to get him. Like his stuff about people being phony and superficial and stuff. Like from like half of the book on, I was sort of more engaged and more invested and had more of a connection with the narrative, which I found interesting. Yeah, the only other thing is the very interesting late 40s, early 50s language. Like there's swearing in it, but the swearing we have nowadays feels so much different than the swearing back then. Like the word lousy, they use the word lousy a lot. "Oh, that's lousy. Oh, something's lousy," and it's sort of seen as a bad word, which is just interesting. And there's always like, he always says stuff like, "It really did," um, like, oh, and like that, "It killed me," or "She kills me," or "That kills me," to mean like I really liked it or it made me laugh. Like, "She kills me." She really did. Like, just out of the language, it's so I mean, it's written like not a dialogue, a monologue, like someone verbally telling you this story, and the sentence structure and vocabulary and grammar is very much gives that across. Like, it'd be very interesting to listen to an audiobook of this book. I think it lends itself very well to an audio format. Yeah, so that's Catcher in the Rye. That's the whole story. I mean, I think people probably still do this in high school, but like we analyzed it and like had book clubs about it and talked about it, and I'm sure there's so much more to it. But that's sort of my experience with it, coming back to it many years after I first read it, and I did enjoy it. I think it was a good. I think it is a good book, and I'm glad I went back to it after hating it so much. And it'd be interesting now to see if there's a book that I loved in high school that I could read now and hate. Maybe something by Ayn Rand. But anyways, so that's J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye.